Welcome everybody, this is once again Aleksandr with another video on the topic Quiescence error. In this lecture we're going to proceed with some more harder examples, and here, like I promised, I'm going to show you some examples where I myself have made Quiescence errors. So, here we go. This is my game from 2009 against Ray Robson. Probably most people heard of Ray Robson, Grandmaster, one of the Americans' most prominent players, also very young. And when I played him, he was, I think, 14 years old. So I was white, and the opening stage doesn't matter for our purposes that super much. So I'm going to run through the opening relatively quickly. I think e6 is a bit safer because e5, the center becomes a bit shattered. Yes, and here, so my opponent here made a mistake because he allowed a nice tactical trick. So he was the first one who made the quiescence error. I played g4. Why don't I take on e5 right away? Well, because the e2 pawn will hang in the variation. So I played g4 first, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes d5. And here the move b5 was quite interesting. And in that case, I could play here. If bishop takes, then I take back. So he has to try this. I take the exchange. And now we have a material imbalance. He has two pieces for the rook, but I have two pawns, and my king is going to be pretty well protected, and I have some passed pawns. So that position I was happy going into. I calculated that, I think. So Ray went for an interesting idea. He realized that his position isn't that good, so he went ahead and tried for counterplay. And he played h5, which is a sensible way of playing. I played a move f4. Double-edged move. I have alternatives. Maybe I could play d4, but I chose f4. Objectively, not that bad. Takes, bishop back. If he plays h4, I think I could play d4, covering the h3 square. Or maybe I have other moves. He took on e2, makes sense. I took on b7. And now he played bishop h4. So here's an example. So here, question is, can you take the rook? Looks like the rook's hanging. Is the rook takeable? So this should be a relatively straightforward question. So I'm going to give you guys some time to see if you could figure that out. And the answer is, well, actually, I can't, because here he checks me, he cuts off my king, and after I move away, he goes here, queen h4, queen g3. I simply cannot stop that mate, despite being up a rook and a piece. Same thing here, can't stop that mate. Bishop moves here, queen h3. So I have it in the back of my mind, so I can't take the rook here. So I play this move, bishop e1. Now, of course, if he takes, then I take with, and I have a very strong position. Queen takes, I could play rook d1, and I'm consolidating. He has to trade queens, or maybe he could play this, but I play here. He has to trade queens, and okay, I'm going to be up a piece in the endgame. So he did the right move. He checked me. I moved here, and now bishop takes c1. And here, this is a very critical moment. What should I do? Now, to me, during the game, it looked like it was obvious, but that obvious move turned out to be quite a big mistake. So, white to move. What should white do? Think about it for like as long as you need, and try to decide what should white play here. Look at all checks and captures. Okay, so if you need more time, pause your video. During the game, maybe for whatever reason I was nervous and I did not have enough inner peace, and I did not have, I wasn't very stable during that time yet. Not to say that I'm stable always now, but back then I was younger, more impatient, I was able to control my nerves much less, and I was not in my best form in that tournament. And for whatever reason, I made an automatic move, thinking that it has to be played, that I have to get rid of the bishop immediately, no matter what. I thought this is the only move, and I did not even consider the idea of taking the rook. Why? Because what I showed you earlier, that the rook was untakeable in that variation. However, here, if you look at it logically, this is a completely different position. The structure of the king and the bishop, his harmony is now messed up. And now, after bishop e1, actually, now I could actually take the rook, surprisingly enough. And he cannot set up that same mate because he simply does not have time for that. In the other position, the bishop was on f2 and he can play queen g3. But here he has to lose that tempo for a move like that. And now I can, worst comes to worst, just play, I can take on c6. And if he plays here, then I could play queen f3. Like, that extra tempo matters a lot. So I can do a lot with that extra tempo. And if he plays here, I can even play here and sack that thing back in some cases. This should have been winning for me. The computer gives a big advantage to me in this case. Instead of that, I automatically take here. He takes here, of course. And now all of a sudden I realize maybe I expected this. And I expected him about to resign. Maybe I was getting too excited about winning the game, which is always bad. You have to always control your emotions and not worrying about a turbulent situation. And just, this was a game basically for first place in the US Junior Championship back in 2009. If I would have won the game, I would have been tied with him going into the last round. But instead, I allow this perpetual check. And now if I take the rook, then he checks, check. And I can't stop the perpetual, because if I go here, he takes. And even though I seem to have a lot of pieces for the queen, he has a bunch of pawns and my pieces are not coordinated, and I'm definitely worse here. Whereas if I go here, then he just checks me. And if I try king h2, then he checks me from f4, not allowing bishop h3. And I simply can't get out of that perpetual. So for whatever reason, I missed that pattern, or I missed the fact that he could play queen takes f4, and I completely forgot that I could just take that rook. Like, I wasn't even aware of that possibility. This is called quiescence error, conventional thinking, not being aware of that stuff. So that's the point. This is a very bad habit that which I myself exhibited. And because I've had experiences like that, I wanted to show them to you. And that's why I was encouraged to doing the lectures on avoiding the quiescence errors. Because if I couldn't avoid them, then, of course, that's a common problem in chess, because a lot of games are spoiled because of that. In the first lecture, I showed you how an elite player messed up. And the game ended up, I ended up losing the game later on, which I don't really necessarily want to show. It's not really relevant. Basically, I just tried too hard to win because of the tournament situation, and I ended up just completely beating myself instead of just taking the rook. So I started playing very badly from here on. So, but that doesn't matter. The point is how I did not take that rook because of conventional thinking, because of what happened earlier. Same thing that I did in 2010. Hopefully this experience maybe taught me. So this was the game I lost to Ray Robson. Now let me show you another game. So in this position, I'm playing with white against around a 2300 player in the first round of the World Junior that same year. And like I said, I was about 19. I was still not as experienced. I was still a bit impatient. And in this position, it's white to move. How would you try to realize your advantage? And your opponent, by the way, is in time pressure. He has to make like a couple of moves in a minute or something. It's your first round. You might be a little tired. White to move. How should you realize your advantage? Well, if you set the move rook a8, shame on you, because you just allowed a forced draw by this and g4. You allowed black's only counterplay. You did not look ahead, and you were thinking very conventionally, and this is a big quiescence error that I personally made. What should white do instead? After g4, black can resign, nearly resign, because then after that, he simply can't do anything about his pawns falling, and I stop his only counterplay. So accuracy till the very end. Avoid the quiescence there, even in the simple looking positions. Make sure before you make your move, ask yourself, what can your opponent do? Otherwise, you can blow away a point just like that. And you never know how maybe the turn would have turned better for me if I would have won that game to start the tournament with. And instead, I drew the game and was very disappointing. Here's another endgame, which I ended up blowing. This is a game that I played in 2011 in Las Vegas against an international master, Jake Kleiman. So we got to this endgame where I have to make a decision now. The early part of the game isn't that super important, although it has instructive moments, but for the purpose of the lecture, we're going to go through the endgame because that endgame is very interesting. So it's black to move, and black has chances to win, obviously, because he has that a2 pawn, and this white rook is tied up. If this rook ever moves to c8 away from the a file, this rook will move away and the pawn will queen. So, and also the king is tied up, because if the king moves, let's say if the king moves to f3 or something, then rook f1 check, king moves to d3, rook d1 check, and the pawn will queen. Not only that, he can't play f5 for that same reason, because the king will be forced to move. So pretty much he's tied down to either just only moving the rook, which is good to know. What's also good to realize is that eventually, if the rook will not be able to hold the king if the king penetrates here. If the king gets somewhere to g3, the game will be over because black will be able to take one of the pawns, and this is going to be winning. So the question is how to play for the win here. White to move, try to play for the win. Material is equal, but of course these double pawns are not as strong as this rook. This pawn on a2 is a very big nuisance for white because he's paralyzed because of that. So I'm going to give you guys time from 3 minutes to as much as maybe 15, 20 minutes because this is a very important endgame position. And try to calculate everything till the end. And try to avoid the quiescence there. So pretty much it's between two moves. f5 is not very good. Obviously you can't move the rook. Well, you could try this move, but that will not win probably because then he just moves away and the material is equal and this is not winnable. Same thing with rook h1. So that won't really work. So you have to try to use zugzwang. A move like f6 is bad because this and then white will win, followed by king e5, e4. f5 check. So okay, if you could still pause your videos if you need to. f5 check, takes, rook a7, and again it's very dangerous. Or g5 even, takes, and then king e5, and white might be playing for the win here as well. So you can't let white invade further. So that's why you can't move the f pawn, because you can't let white get rid of that pawn, because then the king will free up to go to e5, and then black will be the one fighting for a draw. King h7 doesn't do very much. So it's pretty much between h5 or g5 to try to win. So which one should you choose? Well, if you chose g5, congratulations. You played like your host right here. Wrong move. Because on g5, white could simply take. And even though after king h7, I saw that I'm going to zugzwang the rook out and I'm going to win all these pawns because he won't be able to protect it with the king. However, and of course he won't be able to take anything from me. But what I forgot is he can just simply give me all these pawns. And then I have no progress. These pawns, this pawn holds these two pawns. I never can get to the e3 pawn. And this is simply a draw. There's absolutely no way to make progress. The rook can't move. The king, well, even if it moves to c3, the point is, then like let's say I do this, he could just start checking me. Check. And as soon as the king goes far away from the pawn, then I move back to a7, attack the a2 pawn, simple draw. Absolutely nothing to be done here. No weaknesses, nothing that black can just go ahead and capture. Dead draw. simply forgot about the concept that after g5, I win these pawns, yes, but what happens after? Conventional thinking, Quiescence error. I looked a couple moves ahead, but I didn't look deeply enough to realize that even if I take these pawns, it's a draw. On the other hand, the move h5 looks like, okay, well, he just plays g5, and how in the world can you win this? Rook h1 won't win, because then I take, and then the king is tied up, king f3, he guards this pawn easily, and the rook guards the king, dead draw. However, black has a very nice triangulation here, Zugzwanging. All you need to do is get the king to f8, and then the game will be winning. So here's how it's done. Triangulation. Typical moment, not only in rook endgames, but very typical in pawn and bishop endgames, and in general in endgames. Losing a move, king h7. Now what's white to do? He can't move this pawn, he can't move the king. He tries to move the rook. King g8. Check. Otherwise, king f8, king g7. And now he can't stop me from going to king f8, because if he stays in the 8th rank, then the rook moves. So now, look what happens. Okay, he can't do anything to me. But he can't take the pawn, he can't do anything, because the pawn's on a2. And he simply has to let my king invade. And look what happens. The king invades. And of course, white has to be careful not to allow the king somewhere. But point is that king comes over here, takes the pawn, h4, wins. White's completely powerless. So this problem proves once again, looks could be deceiving. The things that seem obvious might not necessarily be obvious. First glance, h5 looks, how can you play it? Let him lock it up. Isn't it just a quick draw? Whereas g5 looks like it opens up the game and now I can invade. Well, again, looks can be deceiving. That's why you don't judge the book by its cover. And you don't judge a person by a first impression. So that's the same thing here. This cost me the game. And again, it was an important third round game. If I would have won the game, then the whole tournament might have been different for me. But as it was, I ended up making 4 draws in the tournament and just having a bad game, bad tournament. All starts with making these quiescence errors. Funny thing that in this same tournament, I made another quiescence error against another person, but that game I might show you at another time. Okay, so with this end game, which I blew, that other quiescence error of mine against this other player in the very next round, we'll do that in the next lecture. In the meantime, we're done for this one. So long, everyone. This was Alex Lenderman signing off.